While CommonJS modules are standard in traditional Node.js environments, modern JavaScript uses a cleaner native system called ECMAScript. This system uses the export and import from keywords. By default, Node.js expects CommonJS syntax. To tell your computer that you want to use modern ES modules, you must have a package.json file and add a key value configuration pair with the key type and the value module. Without this configuration, Node will throw an error the moment it sees an import keyword. It is also typical for developers to use a syntax called Destructuring in order to have direct names for each asset in the export object. Let's demonstrate how all of this works, starting by creating a package.json file with NPM. Something I want to point out with my particular project here, my repository has a number of different tutorials in a larger structure, and I do have a package.json file here at the root of my repository that contains general configurations for all of my files. But for this, you want to treat this demo folder as being your project, and that means I need a local package.json file that just applies to these modules here. So I'm going to make sure that I'm already in the right directory before I use my npm command. The shortest way to spin up a package.json file is to say npm init -y. It gives you a very basic JSON configuration, which looks a lot like a JavaScript object, but notice that the keys are in double quotes. The important thing to notice is that right now it's set the type to CommonJS. If we're going to use ES modules, we need to change that to say module. So I will go to package.json, change it to module, and now when I go to use the modern syntax, it will not throw any errors. So now that we've taken care of this configuration, let's take a look at our files. In soundeffects.js, we have two constants and a function that can be exported. When we have multiple items to export, all we need to do in ES modules is put the export keyword in front of each declaration. Behind the scenes, all three of these are being placed in an export object, which you were able to visualize when we used the CommonJS syntax and created the object ourselves. Now that these have been exported, let's go look at how to import them. I could try to use a syntax similar to what I did in my CommonJS demo, where I create a single name to represent the object. And it would look something like this. We'd use the import keyword, give a general name for the export objects like assets, and then say from, and then in quotes, give the relative path to sound effects. Make sure you add .js on the end, even though VS Code won't suggest that. If I were to do it that way, I would need to log assets.coinSound. And also use assets to access playLaser, which returns a string. So let's run this. And we get an error. It says the requested module, soundeffects.js, does not provide an export name default. So the problem we have here now is that we're trying to use a single name with dot notation like we do with CommonJS modules. But this requires a default keyword, and we have three different items here that we're trying to export. The modern way to handle this is to use something called destructuring. Right here, instead of importing the exports object under a single name, we open up curly braces to represent the object, and then we create variable names based on the names of the keys, CoinSound and playLaser, and extract them from that object under those names, and now those are local variables we can use without having to use any sort of dot notation. We can use them directly. So let's run this again. And we see clink, gold added, and pew pew, laser fired. So again, this may look a little bit foreign to you right now, but the idea is that you know that you're importing an object, so you can reach inside that object and grab each item you need by name, because objects store things by key and not by any sort of index. Then you can use them directly, and it's very clear documentation if you come back to look at your code in the future or someone else is viewing your code. For your practice, you have an opportunity to practice creating a package.json file here, setting the type to module, and then writing an import statement using destructuring in order to pull in game calculations, score multiplier, and double score. Make sure that you set this up with the proper keywords for exporting them, and then here you'll be able to replace null with the correct names for each one. That's all I've got. I will see you in the next one.